I get to talk to a lot of people who know about this issue, but I am not an immigration attorney. I am not an advocate for either side of the immigration debate, and I am not a policy analyst. So my job is not to take positions on immigration issues, but more so to kind of walk into the minefield of immigration as a skeptic and try to come back with stories that explain the issue and help people to understand it from different angles. And it is a complicated issue. As you probably all know, it's been debated for the last several years, sort of starting in 2004. It's a matter that comes back in cycles, is debated, legislation is passed. Several years later, it's usually back in Congress. Because the U.S. continues to be a nation that attracts millions of immigrants legally, temporarily, and illegally. And the latest debate is directly tied to 2001 and the September 11 attacks that happened that year. There was a lot of talk following that historic moment of securing the borders and of making sure that the vulnerabilities of the U.S. in terms of the immigration system were addressed. That went on for several years at the same time as the number of people living in the country illegally increased. And in 2004, we started seeing the first serious attempts at passing immigration reform. On one side, one major piece of legislation was introduced by Senator John McCain and Senator Ted Kennedy, Republican and Democrat. It was a bipartisan bill that would become the basis of the comprehensive immigration reform movement for the next couple of years. There was also at the same time an attempt in the U.S. House of Representatives to pass an enforcement-driven bill that came to be known as the Sensenbrenner Act. That was introduced and approved by the House of Representatives, and it mostly sought to crack down on illegal immigration, effectively making it criminalizing any action that would assist people living illegally in the country, so that churches, social workers, relatives, or anyone who could be perceived as helping illegal immigrants could be targeted, basically, for violating the law. That sparked a movement. It basically woke up the immigrant community in the United States and their advocates, leading up to marches throughout the country that attracted millions of people in some cities like Los Angeles, Chicago, and New York, and also led to the largest political rallies in Orlando. I remember covering the first rally that took place in a pop car and attracted basically 200 to 300 people. Nothing major. That's what we're used to seeing. But a couple of weeks later, another event attracted 5,000 people. And that basically became the largest rally up to that point. And several months later, we had anywhere from 20,000 to 50,000 people clogging the Orlando downtown during the May Immigration March. So it was a growing movement in terms of bringing immigrants out to the streets. And at the same time, it created increased opposition on the other side of the issue. As you probably all know, the immigration reform effort went through several debates and changes until a compromise was fashioned out and presented in 2006. That compromise bill failed and basically stopped the immigration reform movement in its tracks. But what I'd like to emphasize today is that that was not the end of the immigration debate. That was not the end of immigration reform, and that since then we have continued to see a push for changes, and changes have been taking place, whether that has been the stated policy of the current administration or not. And President Bush's administration sided with the compromise bill that would have allowed many of the estimated 11 to 12 million illegal immigrants in the country to stay in the United States after meeting certain requirements. But what his administration has been doing in the last year or two has been the opposite of what the principles of that legislation espouse. There has been a significant crackdown going on at the administrative level, and to understand that, we need to see that there's no longer one immigration agency. Before we had INS, which was the Immigration Naturalization Service that dealt with petitions and also with enforcement issues. And after September 11, that was broken up under the Department of Homeland Security to create two agencies. You have the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, which takes petitions from immigrants who want to live in the United States. And on the other hand, you have the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, who enforce immigration law and go after people who are in violation. And the Immigration and Customs Enforcement side of this equation has been very active and has basically had a policy shift in terms of enforcement. While before, the U.S. pretty much had a policy of don't ask, don't tell when it came to illegal immigrants. Now it seems to be ask and definitely don't tell, because if you do, you're going to face the risk of deportation and removal, regardless of whatever your circumstances are. We have seen the department go from pursuing mostly criminal aliens, which were immigrants who had a criminal history, criminal record, who were fugitives of the criminal justice system, to now also pursuing absconders, or people who basically failed to go to a court appointment, sometimes because they didn't know they had a court appointment or they had moved, and also pursues people who were in some sort of procedure with the other agency to become legal residents of the United States, either because they were married to a U.S. citizen or there was already some approved petition that was being reviewed. So nothing really guarantees that a lot of the people who live here without papers are not going to be deported and removed if they are caught. And in my reporting, I've documented this trend a little bit, and I've written about immigrants who were one day woke up and were going to work, walked out of their house or apartment, and had Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents waiting outside. We've had agents knocking on doors and coming in and basically dragging people out of bed. So there are immigration changes taking place, even though legislation has not been approved to deal with the issue from all its angles. And there's also more going on in terms of immigration enforcement. Right now there are proposals pending in Congress. There's the SAVE Act, introduced by a Democrat, but supported by a majority of Republicans, which would basically make official a lot of these policies and also emphasize the responsibility of employers to check the legality of everyone who works for them. A controversial measure because it would basically make immigrants the target of more questioning and documentation, whether they're here legally or not. And basically this responds to increased activism and what some of the advocates on the enforcement side call attrition through enforcement, which is a policy of trying to deal with the issue of illegal immigrants being in the United States by making it so difficult for those immigrants to live in the United States that they basically leave on their own or find such conditions here that they cannot find employment, and the country stops being a magnet for that population of people who either cross the border illegally or stay here on expired visas. We have also seen localities throughout the United States, cities, towns, counties, and states passing laws that restrict illegal immigration by targeting the employers or by making it illegal to provide any sort of benefits to them. It hasn't happened in our area, but there were attempts in Avon Park and in Pound Bay to pass local ordinances. And there are pending proposals at the state level which would also target employers who provide benefits to immigrants. Just this week, we have seen a local police enforcement agency in Lake County, basically the sheriff's office, take a more active step in questioning immigrants about their status, because there was an incident where some immigrants, including some who were in the country illegally, beat up on a sheriff deputy in that county. So a lot of the policy changes are taking place at the local level. There's enforcement going on, basically responding to incidents that then trigger this response. But there's no comprehensive proposal to address the immigrants who are already in the country illegally or those who want to come in and find work. You combine that with the economic downturn that we're seeing in the United States, the housing crisis, and immigrants are really in a very precarious situation. Many of the Central American Mexican workers who were in the construction industry in Central Florida, for example, are now unemployed or working basically 1 or 2 days a week, when a couple of years ago they basically had to work 7 days a week and had employers competing for their labor. We have already seen a trend of people returning to Mexico, to other places of origin, or even trying to migrate to Canada or other places where they think they might be a little bit more welcome. As you probably know, the issue is highly politicized. It is an issue in the ongoing election. It may not be the top issue, and polls show that it's not, but it is the top 5. And it is directly connected to the top issue, or one of the top 2, which is the economy. The 3 candidates that remain in the race kind of share the same view on immigration. Senator McCain introduced a reform package which would have allowed many immigrants to stay here if they were not in violation of the law, if they paid fines, and basically satisfy some requirements, such as learning English and basically showing an intention that they want to be part of the society. Senator Clinton supported that proposal, and Senator Obama supported that proposal as well. So there's no difference in terms of the core values of those 3 candidates on immigration, but we have seen on the Republican side how this became one of the top issues in the election. A lot of the presidential candidates had this as one of their main issues, and there were at least 2 candidates, Duncan Hunter and Tom Tancredo, whose main issue was immigration and wanting to see a crackdown. Mitt Romney took that issue, and he was debating McCain. Fred Thompson was also in favor of a crackdown on immigration, and Mike Huckabee was closer to the enforcement side on the end of the debate. All those candidates were knocked out of the race, but they influenced the debate, and they have forced McCain to move from his position. And although we don't know whether his core values have really changed, he's basically saying that there's more of a concern with securing the borders and doing what needs to be done first in terms of keeping people from coming in the country illegally before any other legislation is approved. It is the first time in recent memory that it is one of the top presidential issues in the United States, and most of the policy analysts, experts on this issue, believe that within the next 3 or 4 years, the next administration will have to deal with immigration reform, will have to approve some form of legislation that will allow people to come in and work legally and would also secure the borders and streamline the immigration process so that immigrants who are here can basically get out of temporary statuses into permanent residency and citizenship. One of the fun parts of being an immigration reporter, as compared to maybe a professor or an analyst, is that I get to hear a lot from people on the stories I write. And immigration is definitely a contentious issue, no matter what the story is, whether I write a 3-paragraph brief on some little protest out in Apopka, or I write about this new policy of deportation. I'm sure to have, a lot of messages on my voicemail when I get into work. I have email messages, and our online boards, get filled quickly with comments and people debating the issue one way or another. And one common feature I find in a lot of the feedback I get is that it's personalized, that people are very passionate about it and they're not really thinking through a lot of the issues, but more at this point defending a position, taking the point of view that this is an issue that could be solved this or that way. But immigration is very complicated. It's one of the most complicated issues we have to face, and it's what helps make the United States into what it is. I'll compile a short list here of some of the top messages I get. A lot of the callers realize that I am Hispanic and that I am an immigrant. I guess I hear my accent on the voicemail. So a lot of the messages I get are very personal. They kind of identify me with the immigrants that I am writing about and not the policy analyst or the immigration enforcement people I quote. And even though I don't present my opinion in the stories, they usually interpret an opinion. So here are the top 5 things I hear. Number 5, why don't you go back to Mexico? My answer usually is, I've never been to Mexico. But aside from saying that, it really confuses them when I say that, because I guess there's the assumption that all the immigrants are from Mexico and that all the illegal immigrants are Mexicans. It is not only a Mexican issue. Of course, Mexico is a bordering nation of the United States, and so it's easier for people to cross the border. But we have people coming here from Asia. We have people coming here from the Caribbean. We have people coming here from Europe. We have illegal immigrants who cross the border and are here illegally from the time they step on the United States. And we have immigrants who come here legally on temporary visas, have those visas expired while they're waiting for their permanent cases, and basically fall into illegal immigration. The Philippines, for example, is one of the top nations in terms of contributing to illegal immigrants in the United States, but most people don't associate Asia with illegal immigration. Number 4, I get the complaint that illegal immigrants are using taxpayer dollars. And I wouldn't say that's completely wrong. It is sort of a half-truth. There's no conclusive evidence one way or another that immigrants either contribute more or use more of the resources of the United States. And to give an example, last year there were 2 studies based on census data, one by Florida International University and one by the Advocacy Center for Immigration Studies. And using the same numbers, they both concluded they got to completely different opinions. The Florida University study said immigrants contribute more than they take. The Center for Immigration Studies concluded that immigrants cost more than they contribute. So it all depends on how you look at the numbers, and there are a lot of aspects of the data that are not really measurable. How do you measure the impact of an immigrant working for lower wages and therefore you buy the house or you get the service for a lesser price? Multiply that by 8 million people working in the country illegally. There's really no good way to do that. So we don't know. The answer is we don't know what the cost of immigrants is. Another issue I hear a lot about is why don't they go back why don't they go to the back of the line and wait like everybody else? Here I can see how people see this imaginary line stretching all the way to Argentina. There's no such line. Many people who are in Mexico and are poor or in other parts of Latin America have no way of applying for legal entry in the United States. Even professionals from India have to compete for a limited number of visas. So it's a very competitive process, and for some people there's simply no way to come to the United States unless they basically break the law. Another question, which is very directly pointed at me, is, are you illegal? And basically the assumption is that the Orlando Sentinel goes to a hiring hall or to the Home Depot and hires immigrants who are walking by. I don't know. But something underlying that assumption is that a lot of people think that the majority of immigrants are here illegally, and that's not true. The majority of Hispanics are not here illegally. You have 44 million Hispanics in this country. You have an estimated 12 million illegal immigrants. Not all of those are Hispanics. If you come to Central Florida, half of the population here that is Hispanic is Puerto Rican, so they're U.S. citizens. Another good chunk of that population are Cubans, so they are immediately legal residents when they arrived. And then you add to that how a good number of immigrants become U.S. citizens. They become citizens by choice. So the majority, I can say this safely, the majority of Hispanics, of immigrants here, are here legally, and the illegal immigrant population is only a portion of that. And finally, top question I get is, why won't you speak English? And I'm usually asked this as I'm having a conversation in English with the person who's saying this. So language has become one of the top issues. And we also know from census data that most Hispanics speak English. It's just that it's very noticeable, I guess, to see the part of the population that is either bilingual and prefer to speak to them to other people in their community in the same language, and those who have just arrived here and are still linguistically isolated, but they are the minority. And one example I would give is if you are born an American, a U.S. citizen, and you go to Paris and you know French, and you find a friend in Paris who also knows French, I bet you that you will be speaking English to that person because it's your language. You feel more comfortable in it. It doesn't mean that you are being rude or you're speaking behind someone's back. So those are the issues I hear about. And I think it's a very complicated matter. It's not as simple as deport everyone, or it's not as simple as welcome everyone. There have to be measures, and I expect this debate to continue for years on end. Thank you for paying attention.
It's great to be back, and in order for me to give you my perspectives on immigration, I need to go back to my own roots. I am an immigrant. I was an alien when I came to the States. I was then a resident alien as a green card holder, and then finally a proud U.S. citizen. I'm an immigration attorney, and I deal with immigration every single day. I deal with businesses from all over the world. I deal with families from all over the world, and I deal with U.S. citizens and U.S. employers. What is my perspective on immigration? It's not a political perspective, it's not a media perspective, but it's the perspective of someone who sees the immigration problems that we have today on the ground every day. You hear on the news about Iraq, and what do we want to hear? We want to hear the reports from the ground. What are the generals? What are the soldiers telling us about what's going on? Well, here, domestically, we have our own war. And the war is on this immigration issue. Why? Why is this such a hot issue? Because it affects our economy, and it affects every single one of you sitting here in the audience. I want to begin not with the issue of illegal immigration. because illegal immigration is the elephant in the room. It's the topic that people get very hot about, the topic that is very difficult to solve, and the topic that becomes very emotional to a lot of us. But I want to begin with educating you about our legal immigration system, because that is one of the main root causes of why we have the problem of illegal immigration. I've been practicing immigration law for almost 10 years. And it's only in the last few years that our practice has seen a significant growth in deportations and in enforcement. For the past 20 years or even longer, we simply have not seen any kind of enforcement. And by enforcement, we mean not only deportations, but also crackdown on employers hiring undocumented individuals, and also on fraud, petitions that are filed fraudulently to get some kind of immigration benefit. The law, and this is something that you learn one of the first days that you go to law school, is supposed to be fair. It's supposed to be equitable. That's why you have the scales of justice. The problem that we have right now is that for the last 20 years, like Victor stated, we had a policy of we're just going to turn and avoid asking questions. We're not going to enforce our immigration laws, and we're going to let people in and out as they please. What happened? Well, we have more than 12 million undocumented aliens. But how do we get to that point? Immigration law is divided primarily into two branches. Number one, you can come here through employment, or you can come here because of some family member that qualifies you to immigrate to the United States. In order for someone to immigrate through employment, there are various categories. How did we come to the United States? My dad is a doctor, and he came here sponsored by a hospital. When we came, we thought everything was going to be very easy, and like most immigrants realize, it is not that simple. Even in the late 80s, early 90s, when we came to the U.S., it was still very difficult, and it should be difficult. We can't let everyone in. This is still the greatest nation on earth. And no matter what criticism we hear in the international media, most people in the world would love to have the opportunity to have the American dream. So we can't let everyone in. The system should be tough, but it should be fair. The law is supposed to be fair. When we came, we had the opportunity, through my dad, to apply for what's called an H-1B visa, which is a visa that is for professionals. And why do I want to emphasize that today? Because professionals are greatly needed anywhere in the world. But a lot of the young people in the audience are striving to be professionals. You're educating yourselves, and you're trying to reach employment in one of the professional fields. Anyone in the world would love that opportunity. Today is the day where most immigration lawyers are filing H-1B visas, because tomorrow is the very first day that these visas become available for the next fiscal year. What problem do we have today that has caused illegal immigration to some degree in the professional field is that the H-1B visas have been limited, have been capped at 65,000 plus 20,000 additional for masters or higher since 2004. We used to have, when we realized at the turn of the century that we needed to become more competitive in the world, that we would have more H-1B visas available. And we more than doubled those H-1B visas in the year 1999, 2000, 2001. Now we only have 65,000 annually. That causes not only illegal immigration to some degree, but also U.S. employers to not be able to hire foreign nationals to bring a lot of talent, a lot of diversity, and a lot of wealth to this country. We heard last year Bill Gates, one of the richest men in the world, stating that he needed H-1B visas. He needed to hire engineers from all over the world, not because he simply wanted to, but because he had to. He had recruited U.S. workers, and there was simply not enough for Microsoft. Why do I focus on the H-1Bs? Because those visas are for professionals. They have nothing to do with the big problem that we have today of illegal immigration, in the sense of, like Victor said, a Mexican coming through the border, a Central American coming through the border, or someone from any other country coming illegally through our border. The problem is the system itself. Like Victor stated, there is no back of the line. When we argue, you need to go back and just wait in line, what line are we talking about? Most of these individuals have no choice. There is no line. And whether we like it or not, that is our current system. If we don't fix our legal immigration, we're going to continue to have illegal immigration. We can build whatever wall we want. People will find a way. When you're desperate, you take desperate measures. And people will find a way. We're not going to build a wall through Canada. We can't wall the oceans. We're going to have illegal immigration. Now, people ask me, you came through the legal system, and I did. But back then, we had that opportunity. Today, what would happen is that my dad and his hospital would put a petition in, and then we would be in a lottery to see if we get one. Probably this year is going to be 1 in 3 chances of getting one of those visas. And it's not that we have a huge increase in immigrants. It's simply that U.S. employers are desperate to hire these individuals, and many are filing multiple petitions, and many are filing simply out of desperation. Forget about the professionals for a minute. What about the unskilled labor? Last week I had a meeting with a major construction company in Ocala, a U.S. company, founded in the early 40s, completely owned by U.S. citizens who are in desperate need of workers. And they asked me, Carlos, how do we do it? What do we need to do? And unfortunately, the answer is there's nothing we can do right now. I cannot get you any visa for any worker from anywhere in the world for them to come and help you out right now. And their answer is, well, how can that be? I have $15 million in contracts that I need to fulfill, and I can't do it. And he gave me an example. I hired 5 U.S. citizens last week for a project. And he said, now, Carlos, understand, these jobs are mostly awful jobs. They're really tough. We hired 5. They worked for 2 days. The next day, only 1 showed up. Now, I can sit here this morning, well, afternoon by now, and tell you a lot of statistics and give you a lot of stories like that. And I'm sure someone who opposes some kind of reform can likewise give us stories that would play on emotions. But as someone who deals with immigration every day, I can tell you that the system does not work. It simply does not work. It is not only the individual who's illegal, but it's also the one who wants to become legal. Is it fair for the son or daughter of a U.S. citizen to have to wait more than 3 years to live with a mom or dad? I don't think that's fair. Is it fair for the child of a permanent resident who is allowed to live and work and stay in the United States forever to have to wait more than 5 years to be with their mom and dad? I don't think that's fair. Now, can we make it an open system? No. And we've never had an open system. We've always had restrictions. But we can't ignore the fact that we've had a bad system for more than 20 years, and now it's catching up to us. Let me give you an example of how immigration and the lack of a good system touches you every day. When you leave here and you get in your cars, most of you, I assume, are insured, and you have a valid driver's license. If you're undocumented or illegal, right now you can't get a driver's license. Now, some people argue, well, if we do that, we make it very difficult on those who are illegal to stay. Well, the crisis began a few years ago, and although I have seen some desperation, every day in my office I have no less than 10 individuals who are illegal and who are trying to find a way around being illegal, who are still here, and they all tell me, Carlos, I am staying here. They can try to do whatever they want, but I have 3 U.S. citizen children, I have a U.S. citizen wife, and I'm not going to leave my family. These people have been here 5, 10, 15, 20, even 30 years, and they're not going anywhere. We can try to push them out any way we want, but we're not going to self-deport 12, 15, 18 million people. When you get in your cars and you drive, if you get in an accident with someone who may be illegal, will likely not have auto insurance. If you don't have uninsured motorist insurance, the bill for your injuries or your damage to your car, you're going to have to pay that bill. Does that make sense? From a national security standpoint, do we want to have more than 12 million individuals unidentified? We don't. So the perspective on immigration that you should take with today is you should become informed not only on the big hot issue of illegal immigration, but what about our current system to immigrate to the United States? Because if we don't fix that system, if we don't have employer verification system that works, if we don't give U.S. employers and foreign nationals the ability to enter legally through some method, if we don't secure the borders, if we don't make a comprehensive reform, we're going to continue to have these problems. You can't focus on one issue on immigration. In my opinion, we're doing it backwards. If you focus first on enforcement, you're not going to achieve the ultimate goal, which is to fix the problem. Right now, people that are detained in Central Florida are taking all over the country because we don't have an immigration jail here in Central Florida. What happens? We end up paying, this is taxpayer money, because we need to transport these individuals to South Florida, to Georgia, to Texas. We have overcrowded situations. We have individuals who are actually legal being arrested because we went from no enforcement to a sudden huge increase in enforcement. And ICE and other immigration departments were simply not prepared to handle this kind of volume. The issues that are presented today are what are going to be the issues that the next president needs to face. And certainly immigration is one of the top 5. But why do we have to continue to wait? Do we have to wait for the next president to fix absolutely everything with the economy? No. In fact, we're talking, like the Sentinel reporter earlier talked about the economy. We're trying to take some measures on the impact of the mortgage crisis, oil, Iraq. We're trying to solve those issues. But for whatever reason, immigration, because it's such a hot, emotional topic, we put it in the back burner. The reform failed last year. But you all need to understand that from the person, the tomato picker, through you, everybody in that line is affected by legal and illegal immigration. It hits your pockets and it affects our country. It's a world economy, and we can't ignore the fact that we need to be competitive. And if we continue to ignore this issue, it's going to come back and bite us.
You've been a victim of some pretty nasty personal invective in spite of the fact that you presumably couldn't work for the Orlando Sentinel unless you were a US citizen or a legal resident. Does this show that when people complain about illegal immigration, they're not actually concerned about American jobs or about the need for everyone to obey the law? They're actually just taking a socially accepted opportunity to express racial prejudice?
Loaded question, I think. I think we know from statistics that at the same time as the immigration debate has picked up, we have seen an increase in hate crimes in the United States. So we can't, and I'm specifically talking about hate crimes against Hispanics and immigrants. We can't completely separate that issue from the ongoing debate. But having said that, I think that we have extremes on every issue, and that does not mean that anyone who criticizes the current immigration policies or who favors enforcement is necessarily biased against Hispanic immigrants in particular. I think there are legitimate issues on both sides of the debate, and hopefully what we're doing, in my case through my reporting and having forums like this, is bringing a little bit of reason to that debate and helping people to be a little bit more informed before they form that opinion.